Hello, everyone. How are you tonight? All right, there we go. Now we are live. How's everybody doing? Doing good, I hope. Got a lot of compliments, or a lot of people that wanted to, I should say, on part one, creation part one. This is creation part two. And so, I'm not going to go back into um, all of the stuff that was on creation, one, obviously, because that would take too long. But I will, so I will tell you, uh, you need to go back and watch part one, and then pick up here with part two. Now, just to cover just a little bit, what we're talking about here is not your normal creation story by any stretch. And so, what the Bible is talking about is that when Lucifer and his angels were cast out of heaven, if you look at Isaiah 14:17, it says, "Who made the world like a wilderness and overthrew its cities, who would not permit his prisoners to return home." So, Lucifer and his group made the world like a wilderness. And it says overthrew its cities. And that is amazing because a lot of people do not realize that there was a race on the earth prior to Adam and Eve because of the way the King James reads it. Then it makes it seem like that was the actual beginning. But if you go back into part one, you'll see that I take you through the word and all that kind of stuff. I'll give you one more verse here in Jeremiah 4:26. It's actually talking about that time, and he says, "I looked and behold, the fruitful land was a desert." And all of its cities were laid waste before the Lord's presence, before his fierce anger. For thus says the Lord, the whole land will be a desolation, yet I will not make a full and complete end of it. And that's true. So what did God do when Satan and his angels came down? Remember when I was talking about angels, and we talked about when Sennacherib came up against Israel, and Hezekiah was king at the time, and God told him that Sennacherib would not shoot anything into no they would not enter into the city. They would not so much as shoot an arrow into the city. And God sent one angel to Sennacherib's camp, and the one angel killed 185,000 enemy soldiers in one night. So here we are back at creation. A third of the angels, if one angel can kill 185,000 men in one night, what could a third of the angels do? Well, they tore the earth up. And it literally says in Isaiah 14:17, who made the world like a wilderness. And then in Jeremiah 4:26, he says that the land was a waste. The cities were laid waste. And so when I was first studying this out, and let me preface this by saying that all the stuff that I received here, all the stuff that I'm teaching you right now, I got from direct revelation from the Lord, not someone else's teachings. And for several years, I thought I was the only one that believed this way because I'd never heard anyone else mention it. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, I find out that there are a lot of people that believe that this is the case. And so when Satan and his group tore the earth up, then what did God do? He said he withdrew his light from the world and turned it into an instant ice age. And then that's where we wind up finding Genesis 1:2, where it says, the earth was without form and an empty waste, absolutely wasted. That word is tohu vabohu, and I explained that in the first part. And so he says that it was tohu vabohu, and darkness was upon the face of the great deep. And so that's where we found the Genesis 1:2. God's light was not there. And so before I go on to Genesis 1:3, okay, let me come across, I came across another stunner. And during the time between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 is a very long time. Okay? All kinds of things happened. And again, catch up on most of them in the creation part 1. So I'm going to go on here. And as I mentioned in the teaser, what does the Bible have to say about dinosaurs? So I just couldn't reconcile when I was studying things, meditating in the Word and that sort of thing. And I thought, Lord, what about dinosaurs? I mean, you can go to the National Museum in Pittsburgh and you can see all kinds of dinosaurs there. We have the bones. Now, if dinosaurs were running around the earth after Adam and Eve, then why didn't somebody mention them in Genesis? You would think that such ominous animals running around, somebody would mention them. But they were conspicuously absent. And then that's when the Lord took me to Job. Job is the oldest book of the Bible, by far. And so if you didn't notice that, then, or didn't know that, then let me be the first to tell you, Job is the oldest book of the Bible. Okay? So when you start reading the Word of God, a lot of people start at Genesis. And so, but then if you're going to read it chronologically, you have to start with Job. Now, virtually everything that happened in the book of Job could have happened after Adam and Eve until I got to chapter 40. Job chapter 40, verse 15. And here's what it says. He says, now, behold, now the behemoth. Now, you guys, let me, before I go further, let me say this one thing. You know that if you've been with me for any length of time, you know that I teach out of the Amplified Bible. I absolutely love the Amplified Bible. This is one instance where I don't like the Amplified Bible because they tried to describe what the behemoth is, and they decided that it had to be the hippopotamus. Okay? Now, keeping that in mind, when you listen to the description of the behemoth, it will become apparent we are not talking about a hippopotamus here. Okay? And so he says, behold now the behemoth, which I created as I did you. Now, that's an important statement too, because most people have the idea that when God created the heavens and the earth, and he started creating things, he started creating animals, and they just assumed that God spoke and poof, the whole earth was filled with animals. Not the case. It says here, he says, behold now the behemoth, which I created as I did you. Well, how did he create man? How did he create Adam and Eve? God took Adam and Eve and he sculpted them out of the clay, the world's most amazing sculpture, and he put everything in place, hooked everything up, and then breathed into Adam and into Eve, and they became a living soul. And then he created one man, one woman, told them to procreate and fill the earth. Well, now there are roughly 7.5 billion of us on the earth at this moment. Okay? And so from two people, God filled the whole earth. Now here he's saying he created the behemoth the same way he created us, in that he sculpted that out and breathed life into the thing, and suddenly it became a living being. Okay? So he said that's why he says, I created the behemoth the same way that I created you. It's like, wow, no puffing. Okay? What he did was same thing, one male, one female, let them procreate. Okay, and I'll get into that a little more later. So right now, he says that, behold, now the behemoth, which I created as I did you, he eats grass like an ox. Okay. 16, verse 16, see now his strength is in his loins, and his power is in the sinews of his belly. Now, up to this point, you would think, okay, that might possibly be a hippopotamus. Okay. But then, verse 17, he says, he moves his tail like a cedar tree. And I'm sitting there thinking, cedar tree? A hippopotamus tail reminds you of a cedar tree? No way. A hippopotamus tail reminds you of a pig, maybe, but not a cedar tree. A cedar tree is tall, straight, has all kinds of branches coming off that we might, it might leave spikes, coming out the sides. That would remind you of a cedar tree. That's what a cedar tree looks like. A hippopotamus tail does not. But he said the behemoth tail, he moves his tail like a cedar tree. The tendons of his thighs are twisted together like a rope. It's like, wait a minute. You can't see the hippopotamus tendons, his thighs. It's covered with fat and covered with skin, and it's all smooth. You cannot tell that the tendons of his thighs are twisted together like a rope. Well, the behemoth, you could see it. You could see that his muscles and tendons and everything were right out in open view. And that's why God's pointing it out. Okay? So he says that his bones are like tubes of bronze. Okay? His limbs or ribs are like bars of iron. Okay? Now, apparently, and again, the behemoth, you could see his ribs, and you could see that they look like bars of iron. With a hippopotamus, he has ribs, but you can't see them. And so he goes on, and he says, and the translators put in here again, the hippopotamus, but that's not what the original says. It says that the behemoth is first in magnitude and power of the works of God in animal life. And I'm thinking, okay, here's another instance why did they put in here a hippopotamus? Because when I think of an animal that would be first in magnitude and power in animal life, I certainly don't think of a hippopotamus. I would think more of a more of an elephant, for instance. Big, strong, you know, and it seems to me that the elephant would be a better choice for that. But again, the translators, and only in the Amplified Bible did the translators put in the hippopotamus here. But he says that the behemoth, though, is the first in magnitude and power of the works of God in animal life. Only he who made him provides him with his sword-like tusks. Sword-like tusks. That too sounds like an elephant, more like an elephant. But what he's talking about is this behemoth has these sword-like tusks coming out. And he says only God who made him can bring his sword to, or bring near his sword to master him. He says you're not going to master that animal. Well, we've mastered hippopotamus. We've mastered elephants. Elephants are great for people in India use elephants all the time for labor and that sort of thing. And God's saying, you won't do that with the behemoth. He is too big and he will not play that way. And so he says that surely the mountains bring him food, where all the wild animals play. He lies under the lotus trees in the covert of the reeds in the marsh. Okay. He said the lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows of the brook compass about him. He says, behold, if a river is violent and overflows, he does not tremble. He is confident, though the Jordan River swells and rushes against his mouth. He says, can you take him when he is on the watch, or pierce through his nose with a snare? He's saying, no. The behemoth, you cannot. You cannot domesticate that animal. But we have somewhat domesticated the elephants and the hippopotamus just does not match the description of this animal. Okay? All right, let's go on. So what I'm saying is that animal that he's talking about is a dinosaur. And so let's go on with chapter 41. I'll show you another one. Okay? He says in chapter 41, he says, can you draw out the Leviathan? And the Leviathan here, they've got listed as a crocodile. And, somebody's trying to call me. There we go. So he says the translators say it's a crocodile. He says, can you draw out the Leviathan with a fish hook? Well, a crocodile, yes, you can. In fact, and he says, or press down his tongue with a cord. He's saying you won't do that with the Leviathan. But with a crocodile, yeah, sure. In fact, wrapping a cord around the mouth of the alligators, how they keep them docile, how they keep them from not eating the crew, when they catch them, and so they put a rope around their snout and tie it off so he can't open his mouth. And he says, can you put a rope into his nose? Yeah. Crocodile, yes. Leviathan, no. Or pierce his jaw through with a hook or spike? With a crocodile, sure. But not the Leviathan. He says, will he make many supplications to you, begging to be spared? Will he speak soft words to you, to coax you to treat him kindly? Will he make a covenant with you, to take him for your servant forever? Who will play with the crocodile as with a bird? Or who will put him on a leash for your maidens? And when I read that, I thought, wait a minute. Several years ago, there was a advertising company that had this beautiful model walking down the street, and she had a crocodile on a leash. And it was, I thought, wow, isn't that amazing that the Bible talks about that first? And maybe that's where they got the idea. I don't know. But he's saying the Leviathan, you are not going to put a leash on him. You are not going to, walk him down the street. Your maidens are not going to play with him. Then he says in verse 6, will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Well, a crocodile, yes, they do that all the time. I mean, that's where we get crocodile boots, we get crocodile handbags, we get crocodile belts, crocodile, billfolds. Yes, but he's saying with the Leviathan, you won't do that. And then he goes on, and he says, can you fill his skin with harpoons? And with the crocodile, sure, no problem. Now, harpoon is huge. And he said, or his head with fishing spears. Well, yeah, if it's a crocodile, you can do that. But he's saying the Leviathan, no way. A harpoon will not bring him down, and you are not going to use a fishing spear in his head. It is not going to work. In verse 8, he says, in fact, lay your hand on him. Remember your battle with him. You will not do such an ill-advised thing again. And I get what he's talking about here is not only will you not do it again, you will not do anything again. If the Leviathan, you try to lay your hand on the Leviathan, then you just forfeited your life. And so he says in verse 9, behold, the hope of his assailant is disappointed. One is cast down even at the sight of him. He says no one is so fierce and foolhardy that he dares stir up the Leviathan. And they put in here the crocodile. Well, that's not the case. I mean, the Cajuns, they hunt crocodiles all the time. And that's something they do on a regular basis. And so he says with the Leviathan, no, you don't do that. He says, who then is he who can stand before me, the beast's creator, or dares contend with me? God says, look, you know how fierce this animal is. And I made that animal. So how bad do you think I am? And so he goes on, okay, as if that wasn't enough. He goes on in verse 11, he says, who has first given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heavens is mine. Therefore, who can have a claim against God? God who made the unmastered crocodile, the unmastered Leviathan. The crocodile has been mastered. He says, I will not keep silent concerning his limbs, nor his mighty strength, nor his goodly frame. He says, who can strip off his outer garment, his coat? Well, we do that with, like I said, we do that with crocodiles all the time. Strip off their outer garment, make them into handbags, make them into belts and all sorts of things. But he says, Leviathan, who can strip off his outer garment? Who can penetrate his double coat of mail? And I think that's one of the things that, one of the reasons that the translators put in here that was a crocodile. Because of the double coat of mail. He said, who shall come within his jaws? And he says, who can open the doors of his lipless mouth? Here's another situation where it's like, okay, now if you're talking just about the lipless mouth, then yeah, I suppose you could be talking about a crocodile, but not the rest of it. And he says his extended jaws and bare teeth are terrible round about. No question about that on the crocodile. He says, but it's even more terrifying on the Leviathan. So he goes on and he says, his scales are his pride, for his back is made of rows of shields, shut up together as with a tight seal. He says, one is so near to another that no air can come between them. Wow. He says they are joined one to another, they stick together so that they cannot be separated. Well, the crocodile's hide is separated all the time. Now, catch verse 18. He says his sneezings flash forth light. His sneezings flash forth light. That doesn't describe a crocodile. And his eyes are like the reddish eyelids of the dawn. Okay, that could, yes. Out of his mouth go burning torches, and sparks of fire leap out. Oh, now that was interesting. He says, out of his nostrils goes forth smoke, as out of a seething pot over a fire of rushes. Sound like a crocodile? No. He says in verse 21, his breath kindles coals, the coals of fire, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. That isn't what happens with the crocodile. He says that in his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh cleave together. They are firm upon him, and they cannot shake when he moves. His heart is as firm as a stone, indeed, as solid as a nether millstone. He says, when he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of terror and the crashing, they are beside themselves. Even if one strikes at him with a sword, it cannot get any hold, nor does the spear, the dart, or the javelin. And with a crocodile, if this were to be a crocodile, you don't need any of that stuff. You see TV shows where this crazy Cajun just jumps right in and grabs a thing, and I'm thinking, wow, that's amazing. He says in verse 27, he counts iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are treated by him as stubble. Clubs also are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rushing and rattling of the javelin. Wow. Now, it says his underparts are like sharp pieces of broken pottery. Have you seen the underbelly of a crocodile? It's all smooth. It is smooth. It does not in the least remind you of sharp pieces of broken pottery at all. And so he says he spreads grooves like a threshing sledge upon the mire. So what he says is that as this thing moves, it literally, the underbelly literally leaves grooves and a trail. Crocodile doesn't, but he says the Leviathan does. And he said he makes the deep boil like a pot. How do you get water to boil? Heat. Crocodile doesn't have heat. He said the Leviathan does, though. He said he makes the sea like a foaming pot of ointment. It's like, wow, that is some heat he is able to put out there. His swift darting makes a shining track behind him. One would think the deep to be hoary with foam. Hoary is an old English term that means white, white with foam. He says, upon earth there is not the Leviathan's equal. They put in here again, crocodile. Okay? Upon the earth there is not uh, there is not the Leviathan's equal, a creature made without fear, and he behaves fearlessly. He looks all mighty beasts of prey in the face without terror. He is monarch over the sons of pride. And he says, and now, Job, who are you who dares not arouse the unmastered Leviathan? Yet, who dares resist me, the beast's creator, to my face? It is absolutely amazing. What are we talking about here? We are talking about a fire-breathing dragon, and that's what he's talking about. And so he says that fire comes out of his mouth. Smoke, he breathes out smoke, and he's and I when scientists talk about scientists talk about some of the dinosaurs, they were talking about how in a beast like this, like the Leviathan, that their digestion is so slow and the food that they eat rots in their stomach, gives off a gas. And then when they exhale, sparks happen there. When they clamp their teeth together, sparks flash, and that's what sets the gas off, and then fire comes out at that point. And I thought, now that's interesting. It's like, wow. And so here, between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, we find the Bible actually does mention dinosaurs. Just amazing. And you can look on, if you want to look at Google Images, there are people who have put up images of what they believe the behemoth looked like and what the Leviathan actually looked like as well. And you may find that interesting. Okay? And so now let's go on. Remember what I said about God withdrawing his light from the earth because Lucifer and his angels tore the place up? It created an instant ice age. Okay? Now you'd think, okay, wait a minute. We've got the sun that puts out tremendous amount of heat. It's a ball of gas that's on fire, and it burns 24/7, 365. Okay? Keep it in mind, according to Genesis, God did not make the sun until day 4. It also says that when we go to heaven, then God's light is going to illuminate everything. There is no sun, there is no moon, because the light of Jesus, literally the light that comes from his face, is so perfect. He says there are not even shadows. And so when this earth is destroyed, and it will be destroyed by fire, then he is going to make a new earth. And this new earth, as I figure, is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 times bigger than our current earth. And I can go into that at another time. But right now we're talking about creation. And so he says here in Job 9:5, he says, God who removes the mountains, and they know it not when he overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth out of its place, and the pillars of it tremble, who commands the sun, and it rises not. Okay, you remember back in Genesis that that happened. Actually, the sun, it was exactly the opposite. The sun did not go down for about a day. because Moses prayed. They were in a big fight with the Philistines, I believe it was. Israel was fighting the Philistines, and the sun was about to go down. They didn't want the Philistines to get away, so they asked and prayed and asked God to not allow the sun to set, and He did. And the Bible says that it did not set for about a day, and Israel then had plenty of light that they could go on and finish the battle. Okay. So, but he says he who commands the sun in verse 7, who commands the sun and it rises not, who seals up the stars from view, who alone stretches out the heavens and treads upon the waves and high places of the sea, who made the constellations, the Bear, Orion, and the loose cluster, Pleiades, and the very vast starry spaces of the south, who does great things past finding out. Yes, marvelous things without number. Now, why is that interesting? Because science is always trying to figure out how the earth was made. The evolutionary theory, the theory of evolution, does not work. And what God is saying is that there are so many things that He has done that scientists cannot figure out and cannot understand it. And just them trying, probably amuses God a lot. So it is literally a frustrating thing that science deals with, is because God purposely created these things so that they were beyond finding out. Okay? All right. Now, let's go back to Genesis. Okay? What time is it getting to be? Okay. All right. We're still good for a little bit. So, back to Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form. That is tohu va bohu. Okay? And remember what I said in part 1, where it says the earth was without form. That word was actually means became. The earth became without form and an empty waste. It became tohu va bohu. And I explained that in part 1. So you can go back and catch up on that. So he says that it was an empty waste, and darkness was over the face of the very great deep. So God's light had been withdrawn. And he says the Spirit of God was moving, hovering, brooding over the face of the waters. Okay? Now, when the earth became tohu va bohu, became that empty waste, and it says here that it was God's Spirit, the Spirit of God was moving, hovering, brooding over the face of the waters. The place was flooded. Literally flooded. Now, how is that even possible? For years, scientists said that Noah's flood was not even possible. But with God, all things are possible. Okay? And I'll get into that again in just a little bit. But it is absolutely possible. And so when God withdrew His light from the earth after Lucifer and his group tore the place up, then it became an instant ice age. So when He's coming back in Genesis, starting with Genesis 1:2, this is not creation, it's a rehab project. God is not recreating everything, He is bringing everything back to life. And so here in verse 3, that's the first thing that God did, is He says, let there be light. And there was light. And what He's saying here is, let my light be back on the earth again. And then suddenly, light was everywhere. And so He says, so God allows that light to return to the earth. Verse 4, he says, God saw that the light was good, suitable, pleasant, and he approved it. And God separated the light from the darkness. Okay? And God called the light day. Now keep in mind, God still hadn't made the sun yet. Okay? Not yet. But it's his light that he says, this is day. And the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. Now, when he talks about evening and morning, even to this day, our day, our clock rolls over at midnight. At 12:01 starts a brand new day every day. That isn't the way it was originally made. It was originally made evening first, then there was morning one day. And so even today, the new day starts for the Jewish people. The new day starts at 6 o'clock in the evening, not midnight like it is for us. It starts at 6 o'clock in the evening. That starts the new day and goes until 6 o'clock in the evening the next day. Okay? And so when the Jews are talking about the Sabbath starts on Friday night at 6 o'clock and goes till 6 o'clock on Saturday night. Now notice he says here, one day. Now the King James said the first day, the second day, the third day, okay? That's not what the original says. That's not what the Amplified says. And we'll go into that again in just a few minutes. Let me not get ahead of myself, okay? So in verse 6 he says, let there be a firmament, the expanse of the sky in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters below from the waters above. What waters above? And he says, and God made the firmament, the expanse, and separated the waters which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. So, what he's talking about here, creation scientists believe that the firmament was a dome, a crystalline canopy that completely encircled the earth. And there are reasons why they believe that. And they also believe that that dome is what protected the earth from solar radiation. So solar radiation would come in and it would hit that dome and then reflect off. And the earth on the inside of that dome was protected. Okay? Now, they also believe that it was a crystalline canopy made out of crystal and that it was full of water. So you got the waters above being separated from the waters below. That's what the Word of God was talking about. And so he goes on, and so he says that's why the waters which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. Okay? Now, Job 38:7 makes an interesting statement. He says, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. The morning stars sang together. Oh, that's so poetic. They don't think so. Creation scientists believe that that's exactly what happened. And if you have ever been into audiovisual stuff or radios or stuff like that, those that used to use long-range radios, will understand they believe the crystalline canopy acted like a crystal radio set. And when the radiation from the stars in the morning, when the radiation from the stars hit that crystalline canopy, it played music. Now, not like Beethoven's Fifth, but it played musical notes. And that's why Job 38:7 says that the morning stars, when the morning stars sang together, and so the radiation from those stars were hitting that crystalline canopy, and it was making noise. It's kind of like the aurora borealis when up at the North Pole, when certain things happen up there, lights go everywhere. Lights are on all over the place. And so we believe that this crystalline canopy that was there encircled the earth and acted like a crystal radio set, and that the stars literally played music. Okay? So, or at least musical tones. All right? So now let's go to Genesis 1:8. So he says, God called the firmament heavens, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. Now, Genesis 1:5, 1:8, 1:13, 1:19, 1:22, and 1:31 all say one day. Each of those verses listed, and I thought that was a really interesting fact, it refers to creation as one day, not the first day, like the King James lists it as the first day. And so, and I'll show you how that fits into the pattern of creation in a little bit. There's so much in the Word of God. You just gotta try to. I just gotta try to keep from going off in different rabbit trails that I'd like to hit. But that seems to indicate, though, that that the rehab project here, was not finished in a 1 week period of time, like the King James leads us to believe, but that there may have been 6 critical days when creation things took place, not necessarily 6 sequential days. Okay? So essentially what God would do is he would create something, then give it time to grow and expand, and then we don't know how much time that took, okay? But then all of a sudden, another day, and he'd create something else because of everything. So everything went step by step by step. Does that make sense? Okay, so day 3, Genesis 1:9. God said, let the waters under the heavens be collected into one place of standing, and let dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the accumulated waters he called seas. We would call them oceans. Okay? And God saw that this was good, fitting, admirable, and he approved it. And God said, let the earth put forth tender vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees yielding fruit, whose seed is in itself. What's he talking about? All fruit has seeds in it. The strawberry has the seeds on the outside, whereas most fruit has the seeds on the inside, like a banana, or like a grape, or like an apple, or virtually anything else, okay? And he says that they have the seed inside itself, each according to its kind upon the earth, and it was so. So, seed time and harvest is an ongoing thing. It never stops. So when the seeds, the fruit falls to the ground, and seeds are planted in the ground then, and then they can be, they start growing, and a new generation starts out, okay? And so he says that the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which was their seed, okay, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, suitable, admirable, and he approved it. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. Now, I always thought that God separated the waters and caused the dry land to appear on one day. Then he called for the vegetation to begin the next day. That's not correct. God caused the waters to part, the dry land to appear, and the vegetation to start coming forth the same day. How is that even possible? Because it wasn't creation, it was rehab. The earth had just gone through an ice age. And so all this stuff starts to come back to life again, which would be the grass type of vegetation. Okay? Then he mentions the fruit in which was their seed. Okay? And that's important. Again, I won't won't do that right now. We'll get that again. And he says, so another thing to keep in mind is that there was evening and morning. Okay, again, the original day with us starts at midnight and proceeds until the next midnight. But with God, the day begins at 6 p.m. and goes to 6 p.m., the next day. And so let's go on to Genesis 1:14, which is day 4. So God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heaven to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs and tokens of God's provident care, and to mark seasons, days, and years. God literally set up time at this point. Time. And a way to be able to tell time so that everything operated like a precision timepiece. And the sun was in its place. All the planets were in their place. At that time, Pluto was still a planet. Just saying. And so they all went around the sun. Although to modern man it looked like the sun revolved around the earth, and that's what they thought, but actually the earth revolves around the sun. It's the sun that stays put and we move around it. Okay? And so God created a way for time to be accounted for. And it's like, wow, okay. And so he created the sun and the moon, and let them be signs and tokens of God's provident care to mark seasons, days, and years. And then he says, then let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light upon the earth, and it was so. So you had God's light that was already there. Now we have light from the sun. Okay? And God made the two great lights, the greater light, the sun, to rule the day, and the lesser light, the moon, to rule the night. He also made the stars. Now let me point this out. The sun is a huge ball of gas that's on fire, burns constantly, okay? Gives out tremendous amount of heat. But he calls the moon the lesser light. The moon doesn't have any light at all. It's completely dead as far as that goes. It doesn't have light. The lesser light that it does have is the light coming from the sun, because the sun is constantly shining, and we only have nighttime, when the earth revolves enough to where we're on the back side of the earth. It's constantly revolving, and then it turns ever so slowly, and when we get to the back side, suddenly it's nighttime because the rest of the earth is in the way and it's blocking all the light. So now we're in the dark. And then the earth keeps moving, and then suddenly, about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, it comes out the other side, and all of a sudden, light again. Why? Because the earth has rotated to the point that we are now coming into the side where the light is. And so the stars, okay? You'd be surprised how many times I've told people, and they've been shocked to find out that stars are not planets. Stars are suns. And the only reason we see them is because they burn like our sun does. So you look up into the night sky, you see all those pretty little lights up there. Those are huge balls of gas that are on fire just like our sun is. Okay? Some of them absolutely horrendous in size. And maybe one of these days I'll get into that a little bit more. Okay? And so he says in verse 15, and let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And so where the moon gets its light is the sun is constantly shining, but the moon is, if you've got the earth here, you've got the sun here, okay? And does that make sense? You've got the earth here, you've got the sun here. It's giving off light 24/7, 365, but we're on the back side, and the rest of the earth is blocking the light from us. That's what creates night, okay? Well, the moon sits out here. The earth doesn't block it. So the light from the sun blazing 24/7 hits the moon out here, and light literally ricochets off of the moon, and that's why it looks like it gives light to the earth at night, because the sun is coming, hitting the moon, and reflecting back to the dark side of the earth. Okay, that's how that works. And so as it goes on, he says, let's see, where was I? So he says in 17, chapter 1:17, he says, and God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, fitting, pleasant, and he approved it. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So this is the day he created the sun and the moon. However, light was the first thing that on day one, his light is what hit the earth. Okay? And so as it goes on then, God doesn't need the sun in order to light the world. And in the new earth, this, just so you know, this earth is going to be destroyed by fire. And one day, God knows the exact day that that's going to happen. The atmosphere is going to ignite, and the atmosphere is literally going to roll off. And it's a civilization-ending event. By that time, we will all be gone. And so when you on the new, then he's going to create a new heaven and a new earth. And like I said, the new earth will be, in my estimation, about 25 times bigger than our current earth. And there are going to be other things that are going to be different as well. So if you look at Revelation 21:23, the city of God is literally, this is the time when he is going to, the city of God sits in heaven, and it is going to come down and merge with earth, the new earth. And he says the city has no need of the sun or moon to give light to it, for the splendor and radiance or glory of God illuminate it, and the Lamb is its lamp. And so also Revelation 22:5 says, and there shall no more be night. Okay. So if you like night, get your fill of it here because it's not going to be there. There's not going to be any nighttime. He says they have no need for lamplight or sunlight, for the Lord God will illuminate them and be their light. And they shall reign as kings forever and ever throughout the eternities of the eternities. Okay? So, also in, notice in Genesis 1, the sun and the moon were not only for light, but as tokens and symbols. He was telling men that you could literally set your watch by them. The preciseness of the sun and the moon's rotations were perfect. This is, of course, the beginning of astrology. This is where the beginning of astrology took place. Okay, now I see that it's already been an hour. And let me see here real quick. We've got more than enough for part 3. And I think this would probably be a good place to stop. And I see that a lot of people have joined us. I see Victoria was worried about not making it on time, and looks like Victoria, looks like you made it. And hello to all the rest of you that also made it during the live, Facebook Live. And for those of you who are watching it in archive, thank you so much for watching it as well. And I also want to welcome all the new members of the Seed, the Bible study. The Seed is growing. We started out a little over a month ago and had maybe 35 or 40 members. And because you guys like the teaching, because you share this page, we are now up over 330 members in just a month's time. So if you will, continue to share the page, continue to invite people to join. Not just they have to send a friend request to me first, okay? But then encourage them also to join the Seed, which is another page off of my Facebook page, okay? And so I also sent out little reminders. There were literally another over 300 people that had been invited, but just didn't accept the invitation yet. So I went down through and sent a reminder to all of those folks, and so hopefully they'll come on as well, and they'll officially join the Bible study group. Okay, so I appreciate all you guys. Thank you so much for listening to me, and thank you for all the kind words and things. I know this is a lot to take in, but there's a lot of information in the Bible. That's why when I first started 40 years ago, I wanted to find out what does the Bible actually say versus what we've been taught. And they don't always match. And this happens to be one thing that doesn't match. And real quick, I'll give you another thing too. How many times have you heard preachers say that people who do not accept Jesus as Lord and Savior will spend eternity in hell? I heard that all my life. Literally, all my life. Well, guess what? They don't. And if people would just, and I'll explain it in greater detail at some point, but this is one of those points where what we've been taught is not what the Bible says. Okay? Because people cannot go to hell and stay there forever. Where is hell? It's in the belly of the earth. Did I not just mention a few minutes ago that God is going to destroy this earth? Yes. And the Word says in Revelation that hell is cast into the lake of fire. So that's why I say nobody goes to hell forever, because hell is not going to be there forever. Okay? All right. I'll get into that some other time in more detail. But again, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And you guys have a wonderful evening. And share the video, okay? Share the page and share the video. Thank you. Bye-bye.